Section 8 of the handy Cyclopedia of Things Worth Knowing. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Dunabeer. The Handy Cyclopedia of Things Worth Knowing by Joseph Trienens, published in 1911. Section 8. Doing business with a bank. In opening your account with a bank, it is proper that you should first be introduced to the cashier or some other official. If you are engaged in business, that officer will inquire as to your particular business or calling, your address, etc. And unless he is already satisfied on this point, he may make inquiries as to your business standing. This being satisfactory, he will hand you a passbook and some deposit tickets, whereupon you make your first deposit, entering the amount on the ticket. You will then be asked to write your signature in a book provided for that purpose or upon a card to be filed away for reference. The signature. This signature should be just as you intend to use it on all your dealings with the bank. If, for instance, your name is John Henry Smith, you may write it as J. H. Smith, J. Henry Smith, John H. Smith, or John Henry Smith. But whatever form you adopt should be used all the time. Once having adopted the form, it should be maintained in exactly that way. The only excuse for variation from your usual signature is when presenting checks or other paper made payable to you. In that case, supposing you had adopted the form J. Henry Smith for your regular signature, and the check is made payable to John H. Smith, you should first write on the back of that check John H. Smith, and immediately under this you should place your regular signature. Depositing money. When making a deposit, always use the deposit ticket provided by the bank, filling it out yourself in ink. From this ticket, which is first checked up by the receiving teller, the amount of your deposit is placed to your credit. Do not ask the teller to fill out your deposit ticket. No doubt he would be glad to accommodate you, but to do so would violate a rule which protects both the bank and the depositor. Deposit tickets are preserved by the bank and often serve to correct mistakes. How to avoid mistakes. Consider for a moment the vast aggregate of bank transactions, and you will see that perfect system on the part of the bank and bank officials is required to ensure accuracy and avoid mistakes. Sometimes the requirements of the banks may seem arbitrary and troublesome, but reflection will show that they safeguard the depositor as well as the bank. The simple rules here laid down will enable anyone who has business with a bank to do so with the least trouble and with absolute safety. How to make out a check. Checks are the most satisfactory and the most convenient method of paying a debt or making any ordinary remittance. The stub of your checkbook will furnish a permanent memorandum, and when the check is canceled and returned to you by the bank, it is an indisputable evidence that the debt has been paid or that the remittance has been made. The making of a check is a simple matter, but even the best businessmen make mistakes sometimes which are as difficult to remedy as they are to avoid. The hints here given and the facsimiles of checks printed in illustration will repay careful study. Illustration. A check properly drawn. The name and amount are against the left side of their fields. The first facsimile shows a check properly made. It will be seen in the first place that this check is written very plainly, and that there is no room for the insertion of extra figures or words. The writing of the amount commences as nearly as possible to the extreme left of the check. The figures are written close together, and there is no space between the first figure and the dollar mark. All erasures in checks should be avoided. If you have made a mistake, tear a blank check from the back of your checkbook and use that in place of the one spoiled. Some businessmen allow their clerks to fill out checks on the typewriter. This is ill-advised for two reasons. First, it is much easier to alter a typewritten check than one filled in with a pen. In the second place, a teller, in passing on the genuineness of a check, takes into consideration the character of the handwriting in the body of the check as well as in the signature. The typewritten characters offer no clue to individuality. Never mail a check drawn to bearer. Remember that if your check is made payable to bearer or to John Smith or bearer, it may be cashed by anybody who happens to have it. Unless it is for a large amount, the paying teller of your bank will look only to see whether your signature is correct, and, that being right, the bank cannot be held responsible if this check should have come into the wrong hands. A check drawn to order can be cashed only when the person to whose order it has been drawn has endorsed it by writing his or her name on the back, and the bank will be responsible for the correctness of the endorsement. If you make your check payable, say, to William Armstrong or order, nobody but William Armstrong or someone to whom he endorses the check can collect the amount. And if through fraud or otherwise someone not entitled to it gets the money which the check calls for, the responsibility is not yours, but the bank's. It is for that reason that bankers and businessmen use such great care in accepting checks. Illustration. A check carelessly drawn. The text and numbers for the amount is in the center of their fields, leaving of space for extra text. Illustration. The same check raised. The amount has been changed from 100, 100.00, to 8100, 8100.00. For the same reason, you should never accept a check from anybody whom you do not know as responsible, and you should not be surprised or angered if someone else should hesitate to take a check from you. Checks or drafts received by you should be deposited as soon as possible. Should you receive a check for a considerable amount and have no convenient bank account, you should go to the bank on which the check is drawn and have the cashier certify it by stamping "accepted" or "certified" across the face over his signature. That formality makes the paper as good as money so long as the bank accepting it is solvent. It sometimes happens that a check drawn in good faith by a responsible party is withheld so long by the person receiving it that there is no money to the account when the check is finally presented. Paying notes and acceptances. Make your notes and accepted drafts payable to the bank where you do business. Whether it or other banks hold them for collection, they will be presented to your bank when due. Pay your notes, etc., on the day they fall due, and early in the day if convenient, or leave a check for the amount with your bank on the day before the paper matures. Banks will not pay notes or drafts without instructions. Keep a careful account of the days of maturity of all your paper. Banks usually notify all payers a few days beforehand when their paper matures, but this is only a courtesy on their part and not an obligation. Exchange. Exchange means funds in other cities made available by bankers' drafts on such places. These drafts afford the safest and cheapest means for remitting money. Drafts on New York are worth their face value practically all over the United States in settlement of accounts. Collections. A draft is sometimes the most convenient form for collecting an account. The prevalence of the custom is due to the fact that most men will wait to be asked to pay a debt. If a draft is a time draft, it is accepted by the person on whom it is drawn by writing his name and date across the face. This makes it practically a note to be paid at maturity. Notes or drafts that you desire to have collected for you by your bank should be left at the bank several days before they are due so as to give ample time to notify the payers. Borrowing. Banks are always willing to loan their funds to responsible persons within reasonable limits. That is what they exist for. There is, of course, a limit to the amount a bank may loan, even on the best-known security. But the customer of the bank is entitled to and will receive the first consideration. The customer should not hesitate, when occasion requires, to offer to the bank for discount such paper as may come into his hands in the course of business, if, in his opinion, the paper is good. At the same time, he should not be offended if his bank refuses to take it, even without giving reasons. Endorsing checks, etc. When depositing checks, drafts, etc., see that they are dated properly and that the written amounts and figures correspond. The proper way to endorse a check or draft, this also applies to notes and other negotiable paper, is to write your name upon the back about 1 inch from the top. The proper end may be determined in this way. As you read the check, hold one end in each hand, draw the right hand toward you, and turn the check over. The end which is then farthest from you is the top. If, however, the check, draft, or note has already been endorsed by another person, you should write your name directly under the other endorsement, even if that is on the wrong end. If your own name on the face of the check, draft, or note is misspelled or has the wrong initials, but if the paper is clearly intended for you, you should first write your name as it appears on the face, and under it, your regular signature. You should endorse every check you deposit, even though it be payable to bearer. Mistakes in banking. Mr. Samuel Woods, a member of the American Institute of Bank Clerks, recently contributed to Munsey's magazine an interesting article on the subject of mistakes in banking. From this, we are permitted by the courtesy of the publishers of Munsey's to reproduce 2 of the facsimiles shown. One wrong word or figure or letter, the right thing in the wrong way or the wrong place, the scratch of an eraser or the alteration of a word, or any one of these things in the making or cashing of a check is liable to become as expensive as a racing automobile. The paying teller of a bank, says Mr. Woods, must keep his eyes open for new dangers as well as old ones. The cleverest crooks in the country are pitting their brains against his. After he has learned the proper guard for all the well-known tricks and forgeries, it is still possible that an entirely new combination may leave him minus cash and plus experience. But it is not the unique and novel swindle that is most dangerous either to a bank or an individual. It is the simple, ordinary mistake or the time-worn trick that makes continuous trouble. Apparently, every new generation contains a number of dishonest people who lay the same traps and a number of careless people who fall into these traps in the same old way. Check raising made easy. One of the first lessons, for instance, that a depositor should learn before he is qualified to own a checkbook is to commence writing the amount as near as possible to the extreme left of the check. Those who forget this are often reminded of it in a costly way. Someone raises their checks by writing another figure in front of the proper amount. 500 might be raised to 2,500 in this way, even by an unskilled forger. The highest court has recently decided that a bank cannot be held responsible when it pays a raised check, if the maker of the check failed in the first place to write it out correctly. The treasurer of the Bath Electric Company of Bath, Maine, had written a check for $100, which was raised to $8,100 and cashed. The court held that the company, not the bank, should lose the $8,000 because of the gross carelessness in drawing up the check. Facsimiles showing the check as originally written and as it looked when paid are here reproduced. Altered words and figures. The altered check is the bane of the paying teller's profession, and it is the general practice in conservative banks to accept no checks or other paper which shows signs of erasure or alteration in either words or figures. End of Section 8.